Rabbi session where my camera insisted on being in this orientation today. I apologize if you're seeing that me in a very narrow orientation. But you know what? Sometimes the iPad does what the iPad wants to do. All right. So, as always, we like to warm up the crowd a little bit with some interesting discussions. So we'll start with an interesting discussion. I had an interesting couple of shilas over the past month or so, and we'll get to the Ask the Rabbi questions. So interesting one was, oh, thank you. So the interesting question was that I received this month was from Rav in another town. The question was if there is a gentleman who wants to convert to Judaism. He's currently involved with a young lady that is Jewish. He is not Jewish. And he informed this Rav that he engenders some trauma, or he encounters some trauma in the thought of circumcision. What can he do? What can be done for him? So I gave him a few different answers in that situation. I said, number one, forget for a second if you try to look at any other possibility. I said, many modern poskim have all said that if you say, I want to convert with the exception of performing this one mitzvah, then you would not be permitted to convert. They would not convert you. They wouldn't go through the process of it, and that would never see the light of day. So that would be number one. So on a question of jurisprudence, it would be imprudent to allow such a candidate to go ahead and convert to Judaism. So, but let's say that this there was a real concern about the circumcision. So in a case of people who had lost family members to circumcision because of undiagnosed hemophilia, which was the case in ancient times, so the way they would get around that is that those children would not have to go through circumcision if they were born Jewish, but a non-Jew, they never answered the question of what you would do in that situation. So there were several modern day poskim who addressed this. There was Rav Yaakov Weinberg, the author of the work Seridei Eish, and he says there that he is unable to find in any of the works of the Rishonim that gives a positive answer to this question, meaning whether or not the conversion can go through without performing a circumcision. There is only cases of where you did the immersion first, because conversion for a male requires immersion, accepting the mitzvos, and circumcision. The question is if you do in any order, meaning, or if the immersion takes place before the circumcision, would that be valid? And the answer that he gave was it's not. It doesn't appear to be valid without the circumcision, just that the order of events doesn't seem to prevent the conversion from being valid, but you could not forego it altogether. That was his answer. Rav Kook gives a similar answer to that. In his work Das Cohen, he was asked the question as well by Rav Weinberg Zatzal, and his response was to say basically I can't find anything to either confirm or deny, and so therefore I would not be one to say that there would be reason to permit such a conversion to go forward. And then he also weighed in Rav Chaim Ozer Grudzinski Zatzal, who was basically one of the Gedolim of Europe. He was the chief rabbi of Vilna. And Rav Chaim Ozer Grudzinski said that he had several cases like this of where Jewish men married non-Jewish women and they had boys. And he was asked about foregoing circumcision for them, and he said absolutely not. And he gave a number of reasons having to do with explaining that the circumcision was an absolute requirement to convert to Judaism, and he has a different long take in it in his work Achi Ezer. But his brief response is he was traveling at the time when the letter finally reached him from the Seridei Eish. This is back in the 20th century where we communicated with letters. So that was it took a little while. And he said he explained that he did not agree with that. So then this Rav followed up with, well, is there a way to do it a different way? And I said, well, there's ways to surgically remove skin using cold, some type of cryosurgery. So we left it at that he could potentially do it that way. Now the problem is that that's not a kosher method of doing the circumcision. So I said you wouldn't be able to make a blessing on such a case. That was my decision I gave him in those cases. I've been researching the matter further with other Rabbanim, but that was an interesting question we had recently. Let's go to the videotape, shall we? So the first question we had coming up for our Ask the Rabbi session. So I think the first question we have here was, okay, here we go. If a physician prescribes you medicine, how do you determine if it is kosher? Then the follow-up is medicine or medication prescribed by a Jewish physician considered kosher, and upon conversion, am I required to only see Jewish physicians? So let's these are all doctor questions. So let's go with all three of those. Medicine and medication, generally speaking, depending on the type of medicine and medication, it often doesn't require to be marked kosher, because many medications are considered life-saving. And so, did my camera just cut out? That was weird. Sorry. Let me know if you can't hear me. My camera cut out for a second. I guess that was an interruption in the stream from YouTube. Thanks, YouTube. What was I saying? Let's go back to this again. So many medications are often life-saving, and so therefore you would judge it by the halakhic standards of what may be used to save your life. And so the only things that are excluded from being life-saving are those things that would contribute to somebody else's ability to continue living, meaning that you would impinge upon someone's right to life by doing that, which usually doesn't come in case of medications. There's a question of whether or not the object was used in idolatrous practice, because there's several things that are considered life-saving, and also whether or not it would involve some type of sexual immorality. So generally speaking, medications are only going to fall into the avodah zarah category. So, for example, you couldn't use some type of idol worship to save your life. The Talmud actually deals with this by saying, when I see people walking into this house of idol worship, they come out all better. So the Mishnah answers and says, they're getting better anyway. So you can't use things like that to go ahead and save your life. But pretty much every medication that's life-saving you can go ahead and use. The question is, is there a problem of kashrut for most medications? So most medications are taken through number one, through a pill of some kind that has no flavor, or where the flavor is bad. And in those situations, if the only issue is forbidden foods, as long as you don't benefit from it directly, meaning that it either tastes bad or you're swallowing it without actually chewing it and tasting it because there's no flavor to it, then those things are not considered prohibited, and there's no problem of that type of issue. But a Jewish physician prescribing something doesn't make it automatically kosher. Kosher is a very, very clear set of rules that you have to follow, and that's something independent of who the physician is. There is no requirement in this generation to see only Jewish physicians. There was a time in the time of the Talmud where there was and in other times in Jewish history where it was people were recommended to only see Jewish physicians because the non-Jewish ones may not prescribe the proper medications for you because they just didn't like Jews. So, but nowadays this isn't really much of a question. But historically, this was a problem. I'm assuming that's where the question originated, was that there was once historically a problem with that. Let's see. The next question was, if you wanted to build a mikvah at your home, could you, and are you permitted to have one at your home? And so the issue is about, there's a few issues of it. What are you using the mikvah for? And we're not going to go into the construction of a mikvah, but we will answer the question on its face, which is, yes, you're allowed to have a mikvah at your home, and this would probably be a rainwater mikvah, and you have to collect it correctly, which would mean having to dig your own pool to collect the rainwater, and to collect it in a way that you don't have any human intervention in the flow of the water. It would have to flow in there on its own without any type of utensil getting in the way. So it has to be delivered straight off of the ground surface and into it. So, or off the roof counts as the ground, and nothing will stop it that would consider it having been held inside of a utensil. And so then you could have that at your own home. There are issues with having a mikvah that would be used by the general community, because generally they want them to be in places where people don't see who's going to the mikvah, especially for when women are going to the mikvah. So they're, even though historically they used to be built next to the shuls, in recent memory they stopped doing that, but some places still do it because that's the only land they have in some communities is a land adjacent to a shul. So they prefer to have it someplace more remote, like at the edge of town, so people aren't going to be sitting there watching. You're not going to sit there on your porch and watch all the people walk by, wave at them as they go to the mikvah. It should be a little more private. But yeah, you could technically, for like your own private use, you could have it in your home. Let's see. Next question was, when you travel to other Orthodox communities, do you have to have them verify your status as a Jew? So that's interesting. I actually had that question some 15 years ago. Someone asked me if you have to carry around his conversion papers when he traveled to other communities. And someone else asked me about when they travel to communities, do they, when they travel themselves to communities, do they have to like announce themselves when they go there? Generally speaking, you don't need to. It's always a good idea to call a community, even though you have resources online. They're like, I have davening at this time. If you're traveling to a small place, it's better to call them and make sure they actually have a minyan. I've done that because they don't want to like show up someone's like having a minyan at their house. Oh, we're not meeting this week. We better had you called. So if you're going to a small community, where they don't have like a small house minyan, something like that, I would basically say that it's a good idea to contact them ahead of time. But you do not need to. What's it called? It would be good to contact them ahead of time, but you don't have to verify your status in order to be counted for the minyan or to get an aliyah. They can assume safely that if you're there, that unless you tell them, if you're someone who's learning for conversion, you should alert them that don't count for the minyan, don't do that. Just let them know. But technically speaking, when people show up to davening, they don't have to ask or inquire. They can assume that most people who are coming there are going to be Jews. There's some interesting questions about that in halakha, which we don't have time to get into, but there's some interesting stories about that. Like there's a story of a guy who used to brag, a non-Jew who used to brag that he went for the offerings of the temple. So the question, I'll get to the question in the chat in a second. This non-Jew was visiting the temple during the temple times and was bragging that he was eating from the Pesach offering, which wasn't allowed to do. So they tell the story that eventually he was bragging to Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira, and Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira said, "Oh, well, ask for this specific part, and you'll love that piece." So he goes there, and everyone goes, "Wait a minute, why are you asking for that part? Nobody eats that." Wait a minute. And then they started asking more questions about it. Found he was not Jewish, and they basically they kicked him out and they banished him. He was never allowed back in. But they realized that when he told that Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira said, he's like, smart man, Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira. The Tosfos asked the question, how is he getting in there ahead of time? So Tosfos basically explains that just because there's so many people there, the assumption is that everybody who's there is allowed to go ahead and take part in the Korban Pesach. The other question was that who was giving him from their Korban Pesach? We like show up and just like ask people, hey, can I join your Korban Pesach? Like, sure you can. That's probably how it went. And then finally when he got there, or he brought his own, they started asking some more questions. Let's look at that last question over there. Serious question, no mouse at all. Why do you have to follow such stringent rules with daily tasks? And if you don't follow those rules fully, you are seen as a sinner. Just curious. Good question. So the way that the way that the mitzvos work, or the commandments work, is that it's a contract between God and the Jewish people. So you have terms of the agreement, and God has terms of the agreement. It's a very interesting covenantal relationship. So the idea is that God, even though being a supreme being, has made guarantees and assurances to the Jewish people. By following the contract, they're going to be guaranteed certain things. They can live peacefully on their land. They'll get rain at the proper time. There'll be bountiful harvests, so on and so forth. Those things are all spelled out clearly in the Torah. So, and on the other hand of it, there has to be penalties stated in the contract. And even nowadays, none of these rules really have changed in thousands of years. The old joke is like, well, I have to take you to court. Why don't I make you pay attorney's fees? Well, if it doesn't say it in the contract, you don't pay for attorney's fees unless specified by law, because sometimes it's just like overlooked. So like contracts nowadays even include, if I have to sue you because to to force you to perform the contract. I want you to pay me for having to force you to perform the contract. So God, being all powerful, simply said, well, I'm just going to use everything at my disposal. I'm going to send plagues. I'm going to send wild animals. I'm going to send this. So when you're all powerful, you could do that to enforce a contract. Everyone's supposed to get that message. And before there was email, you had prophets. The prophets would deliver God's message saying, if you're not performing what we agreed on at Sinai, then I'm going to enforce the penalties in the contract. So, and interestingly enough, the way you can kind of see historically at what time period they were at, the structure of the Torah was similar to contracts that were being used at the time, because the Torah speaks in plain language of human beings. So it was used in what's called the Hittite suzerainty, which is basically when the Hittites would write their agreements at that time period. So it also shows you that a lot of this stuff was developed in the late Bronze Age. That's when middle of the late Bronze Age. That's when the Hittites were actually active, and then they just disappear, either from conquest or loss, or maybe they just all moved to somewhere else. So that's something else. Okay. Other question over here. I didn't have a chance to look up lionfish. Okay, so fish that only fish is kosher if it has fins and scales, and you have to pull the scales out towards the head. So I don't know what lionfish looks like. So you have to show me what that fish looks like. But the kosher scales are the ones that when you pull them out of the skin, they go towards the head. Okay. Then there's one question, which is gender roles, the Orthodox community. I don't know how to answer that. So I don't know what the question is. It's too broad. Are there gender roles? Yes. Are they fixed? No. Certain things are fixed. Men and women sit separately in the synagogue. Women don't serve as rabbis for the most part. Although nowadays they get fun titles and serve as spiritual leaders. There is historical precedent for it. Everyone kind of gets upset about what you actually do, and I can get into a long historical share about that. But to answer your question, there are, and they're kind of simple like that. Okay. Let's see. The next question is, so following up is why women can't be rabbis. The question is, let's say they get ordained as rabbis to teach. Okay. Let's see. To teach among women and provide target education among women only. Is that possible under halakha? Okay. So there's often a misunderstanding between being a teacher and being a rabbi. So being a rabbi is actually a certificate to serve as a judge, as a conduit of the Torah Shebaal Peh, the oral tradition. And when you were ordained as a rabbi, you were tested and proven to be able to transmit the oral tradition. That's the original, couple thousand years, basically before Roman times. After the Roman time period, the end of the Sun and the close of the Sanhedrin, the original ordination as we knew it, which was this special thing that was passed from Moshe Rabbeinu until the close of the Sanhedrin during the Second Temple period, and right after the post-Second Temple period. The issue, I don't know what's up with this thing sometimes. I think there's something wrong with my iPad. So I apologize. Okay. Okay, let's see if it stops. Okay. I may have to switch to a different device because Apple's technology just seems to not be consistently good. So I don't know why it's doing this. But all right, we'll press on. Okay, so to answer this question about women not being rabbis, historically they were excluded from serving in this position because they were not allowed to serve as judges. So they did serve as prophets. They served as teachers. They served as other motivators in the community. But specifically, being a rabbi meant being someone who was someone to preserve the oral tradition and to serve on the courts. So you could do these other jobs, just not serve on the courts. So it's sort of like a misnomer. So nowadays people say, "Oh, the rabbi gives the drasha." Well, anybody could give a drasha. The rabbi was there specifically to provide a service of being a repositor of halakha. Now if they're repeating stuff that's written in the Mishnah Berurah, anybody could say, "Well, here's the Mishnah Berurah. Go look it up. Here's the Shulchan Aruch." Right? Go open the page up, pull it out, flip it open. Right? And you need more contemporary. Here's Rabbi Moshe Feinstein over here. Right here, come over here, camera. Right over here. Here's Rabbi Moshe Feinstein. Right? If you need to find a more contemporary answer, you could look in one of his works. So that you could do. Let's see. All right. Okay. Here, the next question is can a non-Jew own and operate a kosher restaurant, and can a Jew own and operate a halal restaurant? Okay, well, for the second question, halal restaurant, kashrut is more stringent than halal. So basically, if you keep kosher, it's halal. Muslims could eat there. So that's the answer to that one. Can a non-Jew own and operate a kosher restaurant? Yes, but they need a mashgiach there at all times. Okay. Let's see. Okay, so here's an interesting question. Would it be acceptable for someone whose ultimate goal is to convert to Orthodox Judaism to first convert through conservative movement if they currently lack the financial means to live near an Orthodox community, so they can begin living a committed Jewish life and grow within a tradition in the meantime within a conservative community? The answer to that is no. Especially Rabbi Moshe Feinstein says in about 7 different places that joining the conservative movement is like joining a different religion. And from my own experience, just based on how they practice, they don't follow halakha, and so therefore they're not. These movements are basically should not be misconstrued with proper. So the term orthodoxy is really a misnomer. This is not orthodoxy; it's orthopraxy, and you're just not following it right when you're following the way conservatives do it. You're not following halakha properly, and even the conservative Jews themselves had a breakaway back in the 80s from what was called the Union of Traditional Judaism, because they felt that even the conservative movement wasn't following halacha correctly. So conservative Judaism as a movement is in its death throes and is not considered a real serious traditional movement. Let's see. Okay, a question about schach. Okay, so to cover your sukkah, can a kosher schach mat cover the sukkah, be tied to the frame with 100% cotton or jute rope and twine, and it would be sitting on wood supports and not touch against any metal? So that's the question on here. The answer is you may tie it down. You can't use cotton or jute rope or twine because you're not allowed to use something that's quote unquote makabel tuma, but you could use plastic ties. So those plastic slide-through ties would be acceptable because that's not considered something that's makabel tuma. A rope is considered a kli. It's considered something that would become tameh if this was the temple times and somebody who was tameh touched it, and you wouldn't be able to use that. And tying it down normally is not appropriate. Because the mat has to be stable enough to withstand a normal wind. So you would tie it down to withstand an abnormal wind. I used to see this in Yerushalayim all the time. People would tie it down in order to protect their schach on their sukkah on a regular basis. A couple of other questions we got this week. One question was, what do you do with koshering hearts? So do you have to kosher a heart? How do you kosher that? So if you buy kosher animal parts, right? So for example, if you buy chicken liver, and then what about a chicken heart? Can you eat that too? The answer is yes, you may. And the only issue is that the question is, how do you properly prepare it? So you have to prepare it. Do you have to prepare it with salting, or do you have to grill it? So the answer is that hearts and livers have to be grilled, but you also have to cut them lengthwise and widthwise. And after you do that, you kind of squeeze them to squeeze out any liquid that's inside of it, because they're considered to be full of blood. And so therefore, the concern would be that you have to get those things out of there. Okay, so that is that story. to say that you basically have to grill it, have to cut it open and then grill it, and then you can go ahead and use it in your cooking. If there's no other questions here in the chat, we can call it a day. Okay. All right, a lot of questions this time. All right, so we'll plan to meet up next time. If you haven't subscribed yet and you're watching, please subscribe and you'll get notified. And if you reach out to me, we can add you to the Ask the Rabbi list. We just do a little bit of vetting ahead of time to know who you are. But thank you everyone for joining. Thank you to all 36 people that joined. And have a Shabbat Shalom. Take care.